If you could go back in time, what would you change? Would it be possible to prevent wars from ever occurring? Or would tampering with the past have drastic effects on the present and the future? Just as assassinations have altered the fate of nations, and thus the entire world, experiments in time travel could drastically alter the course of history. One such experiment was conducted by Einstein in 1946 at Trinity, New Mexico. Using his own time machine called the Chronosphere, Einstein successfully traveled back in the past to 1924, arriving in Landsberg, Germany. With good intentions in mind, Einstein's goal was to remove the man responsible for World War II, Adolf Hitler, who had just been released from Landsberg prison. Einstein approached Hitler, offering to shake his hand. As the two men shook hands, it caused a disruption in the space-time continuum, thus creating a new timeline, while Einstein was returned to his original. Einstein's hope was that with Hitler gone, the new timeline he had created would avoid the death and destruction that was wrought during the Second World War of his own timeline, though he could not truly know how events would unfold.
Congratulations, Professor! With Hitler removed...
Time will tell. Sooner or later. Time will tell.
While the disappearance of Hitler prevented the rise of the Third Reich in Germany, it meant that the Soviet Union's expansionist policies were left unchecked. Under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, the Soviet Union would begin their march westward to fulfill Stalin's dreams of a continental Soviet Union. Standing against the Soviet Union were the Allies, a military junta of Western European nations with support from the United States. Both the Allies and Soviet Union used a variety of unique weapon systems to support their war efforts, the most important of which was the Mobile Construction Vehicle, better known as the MCV. The MCV enabled Soviet and Allied commanders to quickly establish a forward base on the front lines. This slow-moving truck transported all the materials needed to construct a base, including infrastructure for power, unit production, technological research, and defense. Of course, there was also the financial cost of such fast construction efforts, which is why most commanders would deploy their MCVs into construction yards close to an ore mine or a deposit of gems. These resources would be harvested, processed, and sold to generate the funds needed to conduct battlefield operations. The deployed construction yard consisted of three parts, the first being a dual-purpose garage and warehouse building, which housed the initial vehicle, as well as the materials needed to construct base buildings and defenses. Attached to the garage was an L-shaped building that housed the engineers and construction crew who were responsible for referencing blueprints and planning out the layout and development of a commander's base. The last important aspect of the construction yard was the gantry crane, which would pick up crates of materials deposited outside the garage entrance. These materials would be unpacked and used in the construction of new buildings. Initially, the Soviet invasion was successful, and it seemed like the British would be the last free people in Europe. But the European allies rallied themselves, and with the assistance of technological advancements made by this timeline's own Professor Einstein, they were able to push the Soviet Union all the way back to Moscow. With the death of Stalin, the war was finally over. In place of Stalin, the Allies approved of one Alexander Romanov coming to power as the Soviet Union's new premier. A career politician, Romanov espoused the ideals of the Allied powers and set about making the Soviet Union a benevolent, peaceful country. At least, that's what Romanov wanted the Allies to believe, as secretly he burned with hatred for the Allied powers that had destroyed his beloved motherland. Under Romanov's leadership, the Soviet Union quietly rebuilt its military. Since the Allies had won with superior technology, he vowed that the Soviets would create their own superior weapons. For years, the Allies were complacent. Nobody knew of the secret Soviet experiments into mind control, or the nuclear tests conducted by Romanov's scientists. By the time the Allies started to get suspicious of Romanov's intentions, it was too late. The Third World War would begin with the Soviet Union launching a massive invasion of the mainland United States. While the United States was caught off guard by the initial assaults, the current US leader, President Dugin, had not let the old Allied technology stand. Rallying his troops and allies, President Dugan led the fight against the Soviet Union. Since the Second World War, both the Allies and Soviet Union continued their own advancements on the mobile construction vehicle. While these new MCVs performed the same function as their Second War predecessors, their designs were wholly unique to their respective factions, and the tactics that each used to wage war. The Allies' MCV was a semi-truck which towed the trailer of the actual yard building. Initial designs of the vehicle showed it having 8 all-terrain wheels, though the final adopted model only had a total of 6 wheels.
Loaded up and trucking.
When deploying, the MCV would first lay out the foundation for the yard, after which the primary buildings would be erected. Once these buildings were complete, boxes, barrels, and other supplies were placed around the structure. The Allied construction yard was primarily made of steel and concrete. The main buildings that made up the entire structure included a warehouse, a crane, and a couple of large ventilation fans. When constructing a new building, the door to the warehouse would open, and a crate of materials would be carried out the building via a cart, which moved along a couple of rails. The crane that sat near the front of the warehouse would pick up this crate, unload its contents, and then place the crate underground, where it would be repackaged with newly manufactured construction materials. Behind the crane was a raised platform where additional crates of supplies were kept. While the design of the Allied MCV was heavily inspired by the original model from the Second World War, the new Soviet MCV was more unique.
Building the Soviet Empire.
Instead of wheels, the Soviet MCV used quad treads, with the 2 back treads being a little longer than the front ones. Just like the Allies' MCV, the Soviet one began its deployment into a construction yard by first laying out a concrete foundation. Once this foundation was complete, the 3 main buildings of the structure were constructed at the same time. These were the warehouse, crane, and another structure topped with a dome, being reminiscent of the domes atop St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. Unlike the steel walls of the Allied construction yard's warehouse, the Soviet one was primarily made of red brick, with an iron door as its main entrance. Crates with building materials were located at the northeast side of the warehouse. Whenever a building had finished being constructed, the warehouse doors would open, and a cart was deposited outside the entrance. At the same time, the crane would swivel around to the side of the warehouse, picking up a recently emptied crate and placing it on the cart. The crate and cart would then be lowered underground via a small elevator to be refilled with newly manufactured construction materials. During the Third World War, Romanov's most important advisor was a mysterious man named Yuri. Yuri was no ordinary man, for he had psychic powers that enabled him to control the minds of others, forcing them to do anything that he desired. And what Yuri desired most was to control the world. Yuri's psychic powers were limited, but they could be enhanced with special devices called psychic dominators. While the Allies and Soviets were busy with their war, Yuri was secretly building these psychic dominators at strategic points all over the world. Yuri finished the construction of these psychic dominators shortly after the Allies defeated the Soviet Union for the second time. The Allies' only hope of stopping Yuri was to use a time machine created by Einstein to travel back in time and prevent him from activating his psychic dominators. Einstein's time machine worked, and the Allies found themselves fighting on 2 fronts against the Soviet Union and Yuri's own forces. Included in Yuri's arsenal was the Psychic's own mobile construction vehicle.
Yuri is the master architect.
It was a little larger than the Allies and Soviets, moving on 8 tank treads. As with both the Allied and Soviet MCVs, Yuri's MCVs first created a concrete foundation when deploying. With this foundation established, the rest of the structure's buildings were constructed using a combination of brick and metal, with their designs taking inspiration from Neo-Gothic architecture. Atop the warehouse was a rotating antenna, with additional barrels and boxes placed throughout the yard. When constructing a new building, the doors of the warehouse open and a crate is sent out. As the crate is exiting the warehouse, the nearby crane grabs the crate and drops it off on a circular pad printed with Yuri's faction symbol. This pad is an elevator that brings the crate to underground manufacturing facilities, where it is refilled with new construction materials and stored back in the warehouse, awaiting to be used again to construct a new building. While they all had their own unique designs, each faction's MCVs and construction yards shared similar aspects. While all other buildings needed power from plants to function, the construction yards were equipped with their own generators, so they were always functioning, even if the rest of the base suffered from low power due to a lack of power plants. If commanders wanted to establish a base elsewhere on the battlefield, or replace a destroyed construction yard, they would have to commission the assembly of any new MCVs from their respective factions' war factories. While MCVs were capable of all-terrain travel, they would move faster when driving across a paved surface. It was also best for them to have an armed escort, as MCVs had no weapons of their own with which to defend themselves. If damaged, MCVs could only be repaired at their respective factions' service depots. The exception to this was Yuri's MCVs, as the faction didn't utilize service depots, instead preferring to just recycle any damaged or undamaged vehicles at a grinder. The construction yard was the most valuable building at a base, making it a vital target for enemy commanders to destroy or even capture using their own combat engineers. To better protect their construction yards from direct fire weapons or engineers, commanders would sometimes surround their yards with walls. While engineers inside the construction yards could repair any damage, the structure would not hold up for long against sustained, concentrated firepower. Thanks to the efforts of the Allied commander who traveled back in time, the Allies were able to defeat and capture Yuri, bringing his plans of psychic world domination to an end. However, due to a time distortion wave, the two timelines of the Third World War and its aftermath merged, as according to Einstein, one series of events must take precedence over the other. In the newly merged timeline, Yuri and his forces never built their psychic dominators, and the Soviet Union was defeated with Romanov's capture and imprisonment. However, peace between the Allies and Soviets wouldn't last long, and conflict between the two powers erupted once again. This conflict didn't go well for the Soviets, but this time, they would be the ones with the power to change the course of history. In a secret underground bunker below the Kremlin, the Soviets' top scientist, Grigor Zelensky, had just finished work on his own time machine. Under orders of Colonel Anatoly Cherdenko, accompanied by General Nikolai Krukov, Gregor was to activate his time machine, bringing them back to 1927 at the Solvay International Physics Conference. Here, they would meet Einstein, the man responsible for giving the Allies the technology they needed to defeat the Soviet Union. Shaking Einstein's hand, Cherdenko would cause the professor to disappear.
Doctor!
The result of this action was that a new timeline was created, one where the Soviet Union was no longer on the verge of collapse, and was instead winning the war against the Allies. However, the Empire of the Rising Sun was a new power that had been created due to Cherdenko's actions, one that sought to dominate the world with its own superior technology. In this new iteration of the Third World War, the major powers of the Soviet Union, Allies, and Empire of the Rising Sun all had one thing in common. They each had their own new mobile construction vehicles, capable of constructing bases not just on land, but on water as well. Before the start of this new iteration of the Third World War, the Allies commissioned the development of a new and improved mobile construction vehicle. This MCV originated from Germany, with its manufacturer being Strauss-Fuhrmann Auto Works.
Construction vehicle at your service.
Like the previous version, the new MCV made use of standardized production assembly modules, or SPAMs for building production. This technology of fabricating a wide variety of weapon systems from a single universal component was not new. Traditional production structures like war factories, airfields, and others had used SPAMs for over a decade to assemble units on site to deploy onto the battlefield. The new MCV featured a more revolutionary technological aspect called Virtually Operated Industrial Production, or VoIP. This aspect allowed the MCV to remotely enable the production of advanced technology weapons. High-ranking Allied officials predicted that in a future conflict, the demand for forward bases would far outweigh the number of MCVs they'd be capable of deploying. As such, the tendency would be for commanders to create small stationary bases as the MCV relocated to new sites across the battlefield. Such incredible mobility on land and at sea would give Allied commanders unprecedented ability to project precise military power. MCV commanders were experienced veterans who had seen a minimum of 3 tours of duty. After conflict was resolved, MCVs and their bases would perform secondary functions, including restoring order, reconstruction of destroyed civilian infrastructure, and acting as a focal point for the integration of any recently liberated peoples into Allied culture and society. When moving on land, the MCV used quad treads, which enabled the vehicle to traverse various terrain types. When transitioning from land to sea, the MCV deployed a collapsible air cushion. Not only can the MCV traverse across water, but it can also deploy itself into a construction yard, which sits atop a semi-submersible platform. When constructing a new building, lights located above the construction yard's main entrance flash and continue to do so until the new building is completed. If damaged while relocating, the MCV could receive repairs from flying drones, either at the war factory or the seaport. If Allied commanders wanted access to more advanced weapon systems and technology, they would first need heightened, and later, max clearance. A commander knew what level of clearance they were at thanks to blue lights located on the MCV, and any buildings that would directly benefit from the clearance levels. Clearance did have a limited range though. Any buildings constructed outside this vicinity would not gain the benefits of the clearances. If an Allied commander needed to expand supply operations without moving their MCV, they could instead order a prospector to perform the task.
Prospector on duty!
While seemingly only used to carry ore from a deposit to a refinery, prospectors were outfitted to convert to an Allied command hub. This conversion can be done on land and even at sea, thanks to the prospector's collapsible air cushion. Unlike the MCV, however, prospectors were unable to convert back to their original mobile state once they had become a command hub. While an MCV would unpack itself in a matter of seconds, the prospector would take longer. During this conversion process, an antenna array was built up from the back of the vehicle. Once the antenna was completed, the driver's cabin was raised into the air, acting as a lookout tower. With their antenna array, command hubs enabled other Allied structures to be built nearby. Like MCVs, command hubs needed to request clearance to enable any unit production buildings in their vicinity to recruit or construct more advanced units. The new Soviet MCV was manufactured at the Arkhangelsk tank plant.
I present to you the MCV.
Its first appearance to the rest of the world was at the small hamlet of Smedznagorsk in Ukraine. There, the MCV and its crew distributed prefabricated building components to the people of the village, which had recently been devastated by an earthquake. While the structures themselves were described by reporters as gray, drab, and cookie cutter, they nevertheless provided the villagers with warm, dry shelter from a massive ice storm that later blew through the area. After this initial sighting, these new MCVs were seen across the Soviet Union, spurring the economy even in the Union's poorest areas. While the new Soviet MCV took inspiration from the Allied one, Soviet leaders insisted that it was designed purely for internal reconstruction efforts. Indeed, many media outlets came to believe that the MCV had no military capabilities at all. This was later proven to be dramatically incorrect in the opening battles of the Third World War. A Soviet MCV deployed itself just outside the Central Asian city of Samarkand, where an uprising against Allied forces was taking place. Several days later, Soviet military forces appeared from the base that had been built around the MCV. These forces aided the local uprising in ousting the Allies from the city. With their secret revealed, the fleet of Soviet MCVs sprung into action, with an array of military bases popping up all around the world. These bases spawned the first wave of Soviet forces, which threatened to overwhelm the Allies. When not engaged in combat operations, The crew of the Soviet MCVs built their gray and monolithic structures to house those civilians left displaced and homeless by the war. Such reconstruction efforts helped to bolster the Soviet army with the ideologically impassioned and disenfranchised. Like the military conflict, the battle for the loyalty and sympathies of the civilian population was important, and the crews of the MCVs were on the front line in both fights. While it may have taken inspiration from the modern Allied MCV, the new Soviet MCV featured a more practical diesel-punk design. Using 6 independent tank treads, the MCV could move at a decent pace across various terrain types. The vehicle could seamlessly transition from land to water by deploying a pair of ballast pontoons while still in motion. When entering the water, the vehicle's treads rotated vertically, facing up toward the sky, as the pontoons were deployed beneath them. The MCV could even unpack itself on the water by first creating a semi-submersible offshore platform. Unlike the Allies' construction yard, the Soviet one was unable to build an entire structure and then deploy it. Instead, it utilized construction teams to build structures from the foundation up at a predetermined location. The downside to this method was that the structure being built was vulnerable to attack by enemy forces. Soviet troops often referred to their construction yard as Little Basil due to the architectural similarities to St. Basil's Cathedral. One of the most important buildings that a Soviet MCV could construct was the Crusher Crane. The Crusher Crane aided in the construction of new base buildings and defenses. The Crusher Crane had 3 drones that flew around it, responsible for repairing any damaged vehicles, including tanks, aircraft, ships, and MCVs. Though sometimes, the time and cost to repair a vehicle may not be worth it, which is where the crusher aspect of the crane comes into play. Using its 6 crushers, the crane can recycle any ground or naval vehicle, instantly recouping the unit's cost back into credits. The Soviets developed their own equivalent to the Allied Prospector called Sputnik.
This land is very nice.
Spun out of a failed orbital project, the small, round, lightly armored Sputnik now specializes in establishing listening outposts that can be upgraded into fully realized forward bases. Unlike the Allies' Prospector, Sputnik could unpack itself in just a few seconds. With its rotating antenna keeping it in contact with the nearby MCV, the Sputnik could construct base buildings and defenses on land and water. Just like the MCV, Sputnik deployed pontoons to keep it floating on the water's surface. Once unpacked into an outpost, Sputnik could not revert back to its mobile form. Allied forces were surprised when they encountered the Empire of the Rising Sun's MCV at the Battle of Green Island.
Imperial MCV verified.
Top military officials did not believe that the Empire had enough time to create its own MCV after the public reveal of the Allies' own. The Allies surmised that a spy must have stolen the design docs for their MCV and given said documents to the Empire, as it was believed to be the only way the Empire could have developed their own so quickly. After an extensive investigation, one Bart Truxton was arrested and imprisoned for his role in performing espionage for the Empire, including video evidence of Truxton stealing technical documents of the Allied MCV from a German lab, later transmitting those documents to a Yuri mini-sub offshore. Only later, after the Allies had deciphered an Imperial encoding process called Wistful Blossom, did they finally understand the whole truth regarding Bart Truxton. The Empire had created a near-perfect, lifelike robot modeled as an exact duplicate of Truxton. This robot not only looked like Truxton, but mimicked his mannerisms, habits, and personality. The robot Truxton was able to attain the real one's security card, enabling it to carry out espionage activities. Once its mission was completed, the robot Truxton self-destructed, destroying any evidence of its existence and putting all the blame for its espionage on the real Truxton, who would later be exonerated of his crimes. The Empire performed a very similar operation in the Soviet Union, using a robot duplicate of a man named Maxim Novikov to steal information regarding the design of the Soviets' MCV. Unlike Truxton, however, Maxim would end up dying in a Siberian gulag before his name was cleared. While the stolen technology of both the Allies and Soviet MCVs aided in the development of the Empires, the vehicle featured its own unique design, developing a system that was well specialized for the Empire's own military doctrine. Just like the Allies and Soviet MCVs, the Empire one was capable of all-terrain travel using its quad treads. It could even travel on water by deploying 2 ballast pontoons. The vehicle's front treads would also vertically rotate facing skyward, an obvious feature taken directly from the Soviet MCV. Solar panels seem to be attached to various parts of the construction yard, aiding in providing power exclusively to the building. Besides its unique visual design, the Empire construction yard does not build structures directly like its counterparts. Instead, the vehicle carries a large deployment of nanocores. Nanocores are a marvel of modern technology, being truck-sized, all-terrain devices that unpack into massive military structures in seconds. They can deploy anywhere on the battlefield, regardless of the distance of the MCV that created them. The nanocores can even hover across water, usually establishing refineries next to offshore ore mines. Lights on the MCV flash when deploying nanocores, a feature inspired by the flashing lights of the Allied MCV. Nanocores are completely defenseless and lack the extreme mass or armor to survive a major attack without adequate support. Because of this, it was sometimes more practical for an Imperial commander to pack up and move their MCV itself to the new desired destination. Both damaged MCVs and nanocores can be repaired by flying drones at the Mecha Bay or Imperial docks. The MCVs of the Allies, Soviet Union, and Empire had a few other commonalities. The first was that each construction yard had a crane that was located at the back portion of the building. These cranes were responsible for handling any supplies located at the center of the construction yards, all of which featured open roofs. The second was that the construction yard personnel could repair any damage the building sustained. While construction yards were durable and could take a lot of punishment from enemy fire, they would eventually be destroyed. Since these were the most valuable buildings at any commander's base, it was vital that they keep their construction yards alive and well supported with static defenses and military units. If an MCV was destroyed and the commander had the available funds, they could requisition the construction and deployment of a new MCV, either from each faction's respective war factory or seaport equivalent. The last commonality was that despite being unarmed, MCVs could eliminate some hostile units by simply running over them. MCVs were some of the largest vehicles in each faction's arsenal, so they could easily crush infantry and even light or medium armored vehicles beneath their treads. Mobile construction vehicles were the backbone in sustaining combat operations, enabling commanders to construct bases with which to deploy units and other weapon systems to defeat their enemies on the battlefield. Some of these weapon systems were quite extraordinary, and included the teleportation devices of the Allies' chronotechnology, the electrifying Tesla weapons of the Soviets, the psychic powers of Yuri, and the Empire's formidable battle walkers. All would be used as these major powers fought around the world, and even across time itself.